If you're a Manchester City fan or non-fan and visit any Manchester City related online chatter, video or news, you must have heard 115. Yes, the dreaded 115 charges. Not a single discussion about Manchester City can happen without someone bringing up the 115 charges. And how could they not? This is one of the biggest scandals in English football. But what is the reality around these charges? What are the myths and facts? Well, let us try and explain. Consider subscribing to our channel. It's free and helps us a ton. Thanks. Now before we begin, we must tell you that we already have a detailed explainer on what these 115 charges are. So please go ahead and take a look. Also, none of this is a defense of Manchester City. We urge you to watch through the video before you make up your mind one way or the other. For a brief recap, in February of 2023, the Premier League brought over 100 charges of breaches of their financial rules. Since then, there have been constant speculations on what those charges mean for Manchester City and what the consequences can be. Despite so much discussion and so many articles and news pieces written about this, it feels like some myths keep lingering on. So what are these myths and what are the facts? The one myth that is most purported is the charges are FFP and PSR. They are not. There are some charges that relate to FFP and PSR, but overall, the charges are way more serious than an FFP or PSR breach. These allegations go beyond simply breaching the financial fair play or Premier League's profit and sustainability rules. Manchester City are charged with what can be called, quote, cooking the books. These carry way more complex legal arguments and can't be taken lightly. One of the biggest categories of charges is that Manchester City provided inaccurate financial information. They say the City has not provided, quote, in the utmost good faith, accurate financial information that gives a true and fair view of the club's financial position, in particular with respect to its revenue, including sponsorship revenue, its related parties, and its operating costs. In other words, Manchester City is accused of inflating its revenue by disguising money put in it by its owners as commercial revenue. Or, allegedly, Manchester City has committed fraud. So now that we know this brings us to the next myth. The myth that Manchester City's case is purposefully getting delayed. You'll constantly hear this chatter about how Everton and Nottingham Forest got swift hearing and punishments while Manchester City just went on to win their 4th Premier League title on the trot with no one batting an eye. That's just not simply true. One thing that everybody can agree on is that the opaque nature of the Premier League's financial fair play mechanisms is helping no one here, creating uncertainty that runs the risk of eroding trust in the integrity of the competition. We saw with the PSR charges against Everton and Nottingham Forest last season that the desire to do everything in secret clashes with the huge interest in the case from the supporters. Stephen Borson, a corporate lawyer and former financial advisor to Manchester City, said in an interview with quote, if the charges are proven, it couldn't be any more serious, end quote. He further added that if the club are found guilty, relegation from the Premier League is not only an inevitability, but also will be just the start of their punishment. As of now, the only thing we know is that the Premier League CEO Richard Masters confirmed a date has been set for later this year, although he wouldn't actually say when it was. The nature of the charges means any decisions would take months, maybe even years to reach. The earliest a decision may be reached is sometime in 2025, and we can only hope that we get to know something before the beginning of the 2025-26 season. Football finance expert Kieran Maguire adds that the sheer number of charges brought against City is reflective of both the gravity of the case and also the Premier League's desire to show that it can police its members. He said, quote, the reason for the length of time it is taking is that Manchester City need to put together 115 defenses, which involves the exchange of a lot of legal documents and I think that is perhaps where the Premier League has shot itself in the foot. It was very keen to show the government it could self-regulate its members, and so launching these serious allegations against one of its own clubs was part of the broader response and rebuttal to the need for a football regulator." End quote. Another myth, or rather hope from rival fans, is that the sheer number of charges means City must be guilty. That's not how it works. Charges are just that, charges. Allegations are just allegations at this moment. It's up to the Premier League to prove them, and overwhelming charges like these would require overwhelming evidence. According to Mr. Bosson, the Premier League may have made a tactical error by covering such a large time frame and volume of charges. He says, quote, "The crux is whether the charges will be proven, and I have said before that I think the Premier League has bitten off more than it can chew here." End quote. He further adds, quote, "I think the Premier League have maybe relied too much on external legal advice counsel, and they have not been pragmatic enough or considered the real politic of going to war with one of their biggest clubs. So we are now in a perverse position where if the Premier League wins, it's a disaster for them, and if they lose, it's also a disaster in a different way. Because if they lose, it seems to me the board of the Premier League will come under a lot of pressure to resign. They have created a no-win situation where the best case scenario is still terrible for them, and worse, it is hard to accurately assess the wider consequences beyond the case." End quote. The charges against Manchester City, or more accurately, the alleged breaches of financial rules, have become a hotbed of innuendoes and conspiracy theories. Misinformation is rampant to such an extent that, leaving alone the fans, even the newspapers aren't 100% accurate. Like the constant misinterpretation that there is no statute of limitations that would protect Manchester City in the Premier League's case against them, as in no charges would be time barred. The Premier League rules are stated to be interpreted per English law. There is a standard 6-year limitation period under both the Limitation Act 1980 and the Arbitration Act 1996. It still remains to be seen how the Independent Commission establishes the time limit of charges for adjudication. Regarding the statute of limitation, Stephen Borson wrote, quote, "In the absence of the Independent Commission finding that Manchester City concealed the true nature of the very historic matters, it is hard to see how alleged breaches in 2012 and 2013 will not be time barred again." End quote. That doesn't mean that the evidence from the time will not be considered. In fact, a popular misconception is that City escaped any hard sanctions from CAS because one of those charges, especially related to Etisalat sponsorship, were time barred. While the claims were time barred under UEFA's 5-year limit, the matters were still considered at CAS, and both parties made written submissions on that matter. Manchester City even called upon the senior vice president in the Contracts and Administration Department of Etisalat to give witness evidence to CAS. There's another myth that the leaked emails alone are enough to prove Manchester City's alleged breaches. At CAS, a similar thing happened where the leaked emails were part of the admissible evidence, but mere existence of them was not sufficient. To quote the reasoning from the CAS judgment, "The majority of the panel finds that the leaked emails by themselves are not sufficient evidence to support a finding that MCFC provided incorrect information to UEFA by disguising equity funding as sponsorship contributions. The arrangements discussed must be rooted in contemporaneous accounting or transactional evidence, for otherwise it cannot be ascertained that the arrangements discussed in the leaked emails were in fact executed." End quote. Now it remains to be seen if the Premier League has additional evidence to prove their case. But that's the thing, the burden of proof is on the Premier League. As we are in the process of making this video, another cloud hangs over football, with Manchester City dragging the Premier League into another legal battle over the associated parties' transaction rules. Once again, rumors are swirling about how this indicates Man City is guilty or not guilty of the charges, while yet again, the fact of the matter is that this is a separate case. And though the result of the case can be far-reaching, as of now, they do not relate to the charges faced by Manchester City. Just for clarity, the APT rules that this case relates to are the ones that were brought in shortly after the Saudi-led takeover of Newcastle United and approved in October 2021. A new version of these rules were then agreed in February of this year, that is 2024, and Manchester City is challenging them on the basis that City deemed the rules to have rushed through. The first suspension of APT laws came just 4 days after Newcastle's takeover was finalized, and City believed the rules were applied in a targeted manner. The case will be heard in a 2-week hearing which will take place in private from June 10th. Yet again, none of this is any sort of defense of Manchester City. But in cases as serious as these, it is important that facts are kept separate from fiction, and in this video, we are trying our best to bring reality to the fore. I mean, think about this. The actual count of Manchester City's alleged breaches comes to 130, and yet the 115 number floats around. We counted! On a personal note, we'd like to say that the hyperbole about this being the battle for the soul of football is just that, hyperbole. The soul's long gone. Most top-flight clubs in England are corporate entities rather than clubs rooted in local communities. That includes all of them. Manchester City, Manchester United, Arsenal, Chelsea, Liverpool are more brands than just your local clubs. And football is just a business they deal in. They keep jacking up the prices of tickets, pricing out the local fans in favor of a global audience. Do not forget that they were all ready to approve the clubs from their local homes to play in the European Super League, and only a severe backlash stopped them. We support the clubs we do and can't help it because that's part of our identity, and that's how we have perceived football all our lives. But don't ever fall for their charade that they care for us. And no, the Premier League, UEFA or FIFA aren't some saints either. Everything that you see now is the consequences of how they have run football in general. And as far as dodgy sponsorship deals or corruption goes, every single club has its share of dodgy deals. Like Chelsea and everything they admitted to recently. Arsenal and Visit Rwanda. Or if Middle Eastern ties are concerned, Arsenal's ties with Fly Emirates, or Manchester United's ties with Saudi Telecom and Saudi Arabia's General Sports Authority. No club is clean. Hey, well, at least Liverpool is in the clear, right? Wait, what? Thank you for watching. Like if you liked it. Share if you find it worthy, and subscribe for more content like this. This is Salty Football.